Hi, I'm Alistair Pearce from Working with Creatives, the organisation that helps you work with your creative colleagues. This video, produced for HR professionals interested in training, suggests ways in which creative but disruptive colleagues can be encouraged to make positive contributions to your company. Disruptive ideas, disruptive industries, disruptive technologies, the word disruptive again and again. It's clearly on trend and is rapidly shedding its old negative connotations to adopt shiny new positive ones. Today's company managers run a serious risk of being off meme if they are seen to reject the change-making opportunities of disruption. But does this celebration of the word always go much beyond the rhetoric of modern management? For the old but obstinately real difficulties of working with disruptive behaviour are still present, still to be managed, and still likely to emerge when creative colleagues are important to your company. Disruption is an almost inevitable feature of creativity. So, if you need deep creativity, you'd better be good at handling deep disruption. Let me be clear. I'm here talking about that highly creative colleague of yours whose ideas seem sometimes aimed at revolutionary disruption rather than the disruption being the unfortunate consequence of the creative change. I'm not talking about the modest and entirely manageable disruption of a creative idea that simply generates new products or services that work quite happily within existing company processes and goals. And I'm not even talking about the creative idea, still quite easily managed, that requires a bit of modification to established practices. What I am talking about is the hardcore disruptor whose creativity, whilst commercially valuable to you, comes at the price of serious systemic disorder. How can this be managed so that the benefit of the creativity is retained whilst the disruption is mitigated? I'll give you 3 areas where progress may be possible: disentangling the disruption from the creative idea, teamwork, and choice of projects. Let's start with disentangling. The first step is to equip your managers with the skill to recognize revolutionary disruptive creatives. I've already mentioned one of the signs, that is, the manager's suspicion that the new creative idea has the goal of disruption, rather than disruption being the regrettable but unavoidable collateral damage associated with the innovation. The manager, having gained this impression, may wish to go on to disentangle with the creative the innovation from the disruption, to see whether the collateral disruption really is inevitable. Could we wonder the positive and creative innovation not be achieved with less, if any, disruption? If the manager's initial hunch about the surreptitious intention of the innovation is true, the creative will probably respond angrily to the disentangling experiment. If their suspicion was in fact unfounded, a helpful discussion of possible disruption mitigation can follow. Of course, it may turn out to be the case that disentangling is indeed impossible, and here the manager must simply decide whether the value of the innovation outweighs the pain of disruption. Secondly then, teamwork. I guess from what I've said so far, it doesn't look likely that your deeply disruptive creative is a good team player. For her driven nature, with steely eyes fixed on the goal regardless of cost, is unlikely to react positively to collaborative decision-making and the relaxed consideration of alternatives. And this is true. But if the goal has already been agreed, perhaps before the team was established, then the creative disruptor can probably work effectively as a team member, even if this is simply to remind colleagues of where they're heading. This does not, however, mean that she is the team's leader. This should almost certainly fall to someone with skills of pragmatism and diplomacy beyond the abilities, and indeed the respect, of the disruptor. Thirdly, project selection. A simple imperative for the manager of a deeply disruptive creative is carefully to choose the projects on which she is to work. To do this, the manager just has to bear in mind that this creative is seriously into dramatic change, not elegant evolution. A project that just has to work out how to modify an existing product will therefore fail to engage the disruptor's creativity. This project fuel is simply too weak to get her creative engine firing. Instead, the manager should, if possible, involve her in projects that challenge to some significant extent the status quo, perhaps involving her more deeply in the early goal-setting stages of the project rather than the more prosaic stages of implementation planning. Another area in which your creative disruptor could be very useful is in watching out for the disruptive ideas emerging from competitor organizations. Given that she understands, albeit probably intuitively, the inevitable link between creativity and disruption, she's in a good position to recognize it elsewhere. There are 3 advantages to your company in assigning her periodically to this task. First, she will give you early warning of rival innovations. Secondly, her disruptive tendency is now turned into your defense. And lastly, her time spent scanning the horizon should give you at least a bit of a break from dealing with her disruption at home. There is a final kind of project a manager might consider for the seriously disruptive creative. It's attacking an entrenched aspect of company work that the manager knows must be very substantially changed. Natural ground for her, obviously, but it's risky because revolutions tend to gather their own momentum. So in summary, I've presented to you a valuable creative with fabulous drive, limitless determination, and she's got soaring ambition to bring about change. Great. The problem is accommodating her revolutionary methods of creating within a company that has, for its own perfectly valid reasons, practices and procedures that need to run smoothly. I've suggested 3 areas in which progress can be made. Seeing if her great new idea really needs to come with such disruption, considering carefully her manager's role in assigning her to teams, and thirdly, the allocation of particular projects. Her manager has a tough but doable job. The workshops we run at Working with Creatives shows how it can be done, and we're at workingwithcreatives.co.uk. You may have noticed in this video that I've consistently used her and she when referring to the disruptive creative. This was, I assure you, a random gender allocation simply to get myself out of the tedious he or sheing and her or hissing. I see no association between gender and disruption. The good and bad news, but there's a lot more good to my mind than there is bad. The good and bad news is that male and females can be equally creative and equally disruptive. It's not a function of gender, but of the thankfully unstoppable human urge for creativity.